The courtroom clock had stopped at 11:23, though no one in Black Rock seemed interested in fixing it. Dust gathered on the brass hands, flies worked lazily at the corners of the windows, and the ceiling fans turned only when the clerk remembered to pull the cord. On the morning Samuel Bennett was sentenced to hang, the room smelled of wool coats gone sour in the heat, old tobacco, and the lemon oil someone had rubbed into the judge's bench before sunrise. Mara Bennett stood behind the last row with both hands wrapped around the handle of her father's canvas work bag. She had brought it because Samuel had asked for his spectacles and a clean shirt. The spectacles were useless now. A white film had been growing over his eyes for years. Even with the thick lenses, he had to hold a coffee cup close to his face to see whether it was full. Judge Alistair Vale spoke for nearly 10 minutes about order, property, and the necessity of making examples. Mara heard only pieces. Deputy Nathan Halloway, dead at Devil's Throat, a disputed silver claim, a rifle shot from the ridge. Samuel Bennett, guilty, death by hanging. Her father sat at the defense table with his hat in his lap. His fingers kept worrying the sweat-darkened brim. He did not look toward the gallery until the judge said the execution would take place in 3 days. Then he turned his head. His eyes passed over Mara once, missed her, then came back. She lifted a hand. Samuel's mouth moved. No sound came out. Judge Vale was not finished. There remains the matter of civil restitution owed to Mrs. Halloway. A murmur rolled through the benches. The prosecutor stepped forward with a sheet of paper. Samuel owned almost nothing the court had not already seized. The cabin stood on a mining claim that was now being challenged. The mule had been taken for court costs. 2 old rifles, tools, ore sacks, assay pans, and a wagon with a cracked axle had been inventoried and valued. It was still not enough. Vale rested his fingertips together. Territorial code permits restitution by service when a condemned debtor has no adequate property. Mara understood before the clerk called her name. The canvas bag slipped against her skirt. Someone behind her whispered, "Poor thing." Someone else said, "Poor Mrs. Halloway." Mara walked to the front because the bailiff was already looking at her. The judge did not ask whether she consented. He asked her age, whether she was unmarried, and whether she was physically capable of labor. Each answer became another scratch of the clerk's pen. 26. Yes, yes. The judge announced that her labor would be bonded and offered at public settlement until the civil amount was satisfied. Samuel lurched to his feet. No. It was the first strong word he had spoken all morning. The bailiff put a hand on his shoulder. Samuel shoved it away. He was thin enough now that his old coat hung from him like it belonged to someone else. But for a moment Mara saw the man who had once split pine rounds until sunset and carried her home asleep across a flooded wash. "She has no part in this," he said. Vale's face barely changed. "Sit down. Mr. Bennett. I worked that claim. I signed the papers. If a man is to pay, let the man pay. You have been ordered to pay. You're hanging me." A few men laughed. Mara watched her father's shoulders fold. Not from the laughter. From the fact that nothing he said mattered. She moved around the railing before anyone stopped her and touched his cheek with the back of her fingers. There was dried shaving soap near his ear. She wiped it away. Samuel caught her wrist. "I didn't shoot him," he whispered. "I know. They'll take the north line. I know. Don't let them tell you. The ground was empty." The bailiff pulled them apart. Outside, noon had turned the square white with heat. A platform usually used for livestock sales had been swept and set beneath an awning. Mrs. Halloway sat near the courthouse steps in black crepe, her veil pinned so tightly that it flattened the hair at her temples. Commissioner Amos Pike arranged documents on a folding table beside Judge Vale. Mara climbed onto the platform. Men gathered in a loose half-circle. Some had come from the saloon with glasses still in their hands. Others stood in work aprons, dust whitening their boots. No one quite looked at her face. They looked at her arms, her shoulders, her hands. The first offer came from a hotel owner who wanted laundry work. The second came from a rancher who said his wife needed help with 6 children. A storekeeper offered less and joked that Mara could sleep in the storeroom. Then a horse came into the square at a walk. The crowd noticed the rider in the way cattle noticed a storm. There was no shout, only a gradual rearranging of bodies. A path opened without anyone admitting they had made it. Federal Marshal Elias Wolfe dismounted near the hitching rail. Mara had seen him twice before. Once outside the telegraph office, once riding past the Bennett claim after a survey dispute. He was taller than she remembered and lean, with a weathered black coat and a federal star dulled by years, rather than polished for show. His mother's Apache family came from farther east, people said, though most of Black Rock spoke of that only when they wanted the word to sound like an accusation. Wolf tied his bay horse, walked to the settlement table, and laid down a leather pouch. Commissioner Pike frowned. "This is a local proceeding." Wolf emptied the pouch. Silver coins struck the table one by one. The sound carried farther than shouting. Pike looked toward Vale. Vale's mouth tightened. Wolf counted the full restitution amount, added the filing fee, then placed 2 more coins beside the stack. "For the clerk," he said, "so nobody forgets to record it." The clerk stopped smiling. Pike cleared his throat. "You understand what you're purchasing, Marshal?" Wolf looked at him. "I'm satisfying a debt. The bonded labor passes to you." "So the paper says." Mara could feel every eye in the square move from him to her. Wolf signed the register. Judge Vale tapped the paper with one finger. "Service remains in force until the obligation is fulfilled." Wolf folded his copy and put it inside his coat. "The obligation was fulfilled when the coins touched your table. That is not how the clause has been applied. Then it has been applied badly." For the first time, Judge Vale looked directly irritated. Wolf turned to Mara. He did not offer his hand. He did not tell her she was safe. He gave her a small leather satchel. She opened it enough to see a magnifying lens, 2 pencils twine, a folding ruler, a notebook, and a pair of work gloves. "What is this?" "Your first assignment." A man near the saloon laughed uncertainly. "What's she going to do? Inspect your laundry?" Wolf's eyes did not leave Mara. "Can you read a survey map?" She stared at him. "My father taught me. Can you tell limestone runoff from granite runoff after a dry week?" "Yes." "Can you find the old mule path to the north shelf of Devil's Throat?" She tightened her grip on the satchel. "Yes." "Good." He walked toward a low timber building across the square. Mara remained on the platform for half a second longer. Then she climbed down. The humiliation did not disappear. It changed shape. That frightened her almost as much. Inside the marshal's temporary office, Wolf opened both windows, though the wind brought in more dust than relief. The room contained a cot, a cast-iron stove, a desk, 3 mismatched chairs, and a tin basin with a crack soldered across the bottom. A coffee pot sat on the stove, burned nearly black. Mara stood near the door waiting for an order. Wolf unrolled a map. "Come here." She expected a contract. Instead, she found the superstition range drawn in careful lines across the desk. Wolf placed a brass compass on one corner and his revolver on another to keep the paper from curling. "Show me the north shelf." Mara leaned over the map. "This is wrong." Wolf glanced at her. "The trail? The creek," she pointed. "This line has it cutting east before the ridge. It doesn't. In winter, it disappears under the shale here and comes out below the junipers. The surveyor must have mapped it in flood. Or wanted it mapped somewhere else." She looked up. He set a cartridge on the map. It was longer than the ammunition Samuel carried. The brass was clean. The lead was heavy and dark. "What is it?" 4590 Sharps. Mara had heard the name. Big game rifles. Expensive. Slow to load, and terrible in the hands of someone who knew how to use one. Wolf pushed the cartridge toward her. The bullet recovered from Deputy Halloway was the same caliber. The sheriff said Pa used his Winchester. The sheriff said many things. Wolf took a notebook from his coat. The wound angle suggests a shot from above and west. 400 yards, perhaps more. Crosswind. The casing I found carried a custom firing pin mark. Mara remembered her father missing a coffee tin from 30 steps the previous summer. He had laughed then, though the laugh had not lasted. He had started asking her to read assay numbers aloud after that. He couldn't make that shot. No. Wolf said it without comfort. It was simply an answer. Mara lowered herself into the nearest chair. Then why did they convict him? Wolf poured the last inch of coffee into a cup, smelled it, decided against drinking it. "That is what I hired your eyes to find out." She stiffened. "Hired?" His gaze shifted to her. "Bad word. You paid for me in the square. I paid the court so the court would lose its excuse to put hands on you. You signed the bond." "Yes. So on paper. On paper I control your service." He opened a drawer and took out the bond, which makes the paper useful. Men speak freely around people they believe cannot leave. Mara studied him. "Am I free to leave?" "Yes." The answer came too quickly to be a performance. "If I walk out that door?" "I'll ask whether you want your satchel." She stared at the cracked basin, the black coffee pot, the clean line of sunlight across the floor. "My father hangs in 3 days." Wolf nodded. Mara looked again at the cartridge. "When do we ride?" Before dawn, he gave her oats, dried apples, a strip of salt pork, and coffee strong enough to make her eyes water. They ate standing beside the horses while Frost silvered the hitch rail. Wolf rode ahead once they left town. He was not talkative. He pointed instead. A scuffed stone, a branch broken on the pale inner wood. Horsehair snagged against a mesquite thorn too high for a deer. Mara had spent her life learning what rocks said about water and ore. Wolf read people from what they damaged without noticing. Near mid-morning, they reached Devil's Throat. The place had earned its name. Two walls of red and gray stone pinched together above a drop that disappeared into shadow. Wind pushed through the gap hard enough to make the horses plant their feet. Mara tied her mare to a cedar. There was still a rust-colored stain on the ledge where Holloway had died. Wolf stood at the stain, then turned slowly, examining the surrounding heights. "Where would you stand," he asked, "if you wanted to see this ledge without being seen from the trail?" Mara pointed toward a shelf across the ravine. That shelf catches morning glare. Anyone below would see movement. Another, she studied the ridge. A black seam of rock broke near the upper slope. There, they climbed. The last 20 yards required hands. By the time Mara reached the shelf, her palms were gritty with sandstone and her breathing sounded too loud. From the shelf, the bloodstain below looked no larger than a rusted nail head. Wolf lay on his stomach, cheek close to the rock, and sighted along an imaginary rifle. 420, perhaps. Mara laughed once. There was no humor in it. "My father can't read the numbers on our stove anymore." Wolf rolled onto one elbow. "Look here." He pointed to two small crescent marks in the stone. A bipod, rifle rest, heavy barrel. Mara crouched. Near the marks lay a tiny square of white fiber caught in a crack. She worked it free. Silk. It smelled faintly of lavender beneath the dust. Her father had once hated that smell. A wealthy mine owner from San Francisco had visited their claim when Mara was 16, wearing lavender cologne and carrying a fitted rifle case lined in blue velvet. After he left, Samuel had opened every window in the cabin and muttered that a man who perfumed his gun oil had too much money and too little sense. Mara held the thread toward Wolf. Expensive. He smelled it. Oilcloth. A memory opened without warning. Samuel, 10 years younger, kneeling beside a quartz wall underground, pressing Mara's palm to the rock. "Close your eyes." "Why?" "Because your eyes lie when you want something too badly." She had giggled. He struck the wall with his pick. A clean vibration traveled through the quartz into her bones. "Hear that?" he had asked. "I feel it. Same thing, if you pay attention." He called rich ore the mountain's song. Not because the stone was magical, but because every vein carried vibration differently. He taught her to test instead of hope, to look twice, to distrust easy glitter. Now she sat on a sniper's shelf holding a thread from a rich man's rifle rag. The land did not lie, men did. On the ride back, Commissioner Amos Pike waited for them on the road. His gray gelding blocked the center track. Pike wore a cream vest despite the dust, and the chain of his pocket watch curved across his stomach like a smile. "Marshal." Wolf reined in. "Commissioner." Pike's eyes moved to Mara. "You've had her in the mountains. She knows the mountains. She is under restitution, not federal employment." Wolf said nothing. Pike continued, encouraged by the silence. "Mrs. Holloway requested kitchen service. There are also municipal cleaning obligations. It creates a poor impression when a condemned man's daughter is taken sightseeing." Mara felt heat rise under her collar. Wolf removed his badge from his coat. He did not brandish it. He simply held it between two fingers. "The Holloway killing remains under federal review." Judge Vale issued a verdict. A territorial judge cannot prevent a federal inquiry into manipulated mining claims and interstate ore shipment. For the first time, Pike's face changed. Only a little. His horse chewed the bit. Wolf noticed. Mara knew because she noticed Wolf noticing. Pike recovered. "You have evidence of interstate fraud?" "I have questions." "Questions aren't evidence." "No. But men who fear questions often make evidence on their own." Pike's gaze settled on Mara again. "Be careful where you put this girl. The town may misunderstand her position." Mara spoke before Wolf could. "My position is in the saddle." Pike blinked. Wolf nudged his horse around him. They rode on. At the office, Wolf cooked beans in a dented pot. Mara sliced an onion with his pocket knife because there was no kitchen knife to be found. The beans were undercooked. The onion burned at the edges where it fell against the pot. They ate at the desk over the survey map. "How do we get Pike's records?" Mara asked. Wolf chewed, swallowed. "We don't," she waited. "You do." The next morning, Mara entered Commissioner Pike's office carrying a mop bucket. The arrangement was legal enough to survive inspection. Wolf had filed a temporary service schedule, assigning her to municipal cleaning 2 hours each day. Pike accepted because he thought it proved he had won something. His office was built to impress people who owned less. Thick curtains, a rug from St. Louis, mahogany shelves, a framed mining statute no one had read. Everything smelled of furniture polish and cigar smoke. Mara kept her head down. Pike dictated letters to a clerk, complained about ink prices, and told her twice not to wet the rug. She listened not to the words alone, to habits. When the outer door opened unexpectedly, Pike's eyes went to the same cabinet. When a mine foreman mentioned the Bennett claim, Pike tapped the key in his vest pocket. When the clerk left for lunch, Pike carried 3 files to a locked inner drawer and 1 red ledger to the shelf behind his desk. The second day, Mara found nothing. The third, Pike took a meeting with Judge Vale in the next room. Their voices dropped, but the connecting wall was thin near the stovepipe. "Federal man keeps circling," Pike said. Vale answered too softly. Then,
"Friday is too late."
"Pike, the sentence is Thursday." A chair scraped. Vale then moved the paperwork before Thursday. Mara pushed her mop along the floor. The bucket gave a small squeak each time the wringer turned. She counted that sound. 1, 2, 3. When Vale and Pike left by the rear door, Mara set the mop down. The key was gone with Pike. The red ledger was not. She pulled it from the shelf and opened it. Claim numbers, transfer dates, initials. No explanations. She copied 3 pages into her notebook. Then she noticed a large volume of federal mining regulations high on the opposite shelf. Dust covered every book around it. That volume had none. Mara climbed the library ladder. The book was too light. Inside, the pages had been cut away to create a hollow compartment. A folded survey lay inside. She opened it on the desk. Her father's claim appeared in black. A second boundary, drawn in red, cut through the northern ridge and descended directly under their cabin. Mara knew the geological marks. A deep silver vein. Not a trace. Not a hopeful pocket, a major lode. The red ink at one corner came away against her thumb. Fresh footsteps sounded in the corridor. Mara folded the map. The handle moved. She shoved the survey inside her bodice, returned the hollow book, and nearly missed the ladder step coming down. The door opened. A broad man in a dark coat entered. Mara recognized him from nowhere, which meant something in a town where everyone eventually became familiar. He had a long rifle case in one hand. His boots were clean. He smelled faintly of lavender. Mara lowered her head and moved the mop. The man watched her for several seconds. "Pike here?" "No, sir." His eyes lingered on the bucket. Mara wrung the mop. Dirty water streamed between her fingers. The man's mouth twisted in mild disgust. He walked past her into the inner office. Mara finished 1 more strip of floor because leaving too fast would be remembered. Then she carried the bucket downstairs. Outside, the sunlight felt like rescue. That night, rain clicked against the office windows. Wolf pinned the stolen survey beneath a lamp. Mara told him about the man with the rifle case. "Scar? None I saw. Height? About yours. Hands?" she thought. "Clean nails. Right index finger had a flattened callus here." She touched the side of her own finger. Wolf looked at her. Trigger work. He smelled like the silk thread. Wolf opened a small federal circular and slid it across the desk. It contained sketches and aliases of hired enforcers connected to mining disputes across 3 territories. One face was narrow, almost handsome, with pale eyes and a mouth that looked bored by most of the world. Mercer Kane. Mara tapped the drawing. "That's him." Wolf sat back. "Silent Hound, you know him?" "I know the name. Professional rifleman. Worked railroad disputes, land clearances, 2 witness disappearances in Nevada." "You mean murders?" "I mean what I can prove." Rain ran down the glass. Wolf poured a finger of whiskey over one corner of the map. Mara stared at him. "What are you doing?" "Old survey ink is iron gall. New red ink is aniline. Different solvents." He rubbed gently with cloth. A thin black coordinate line emerged beneath Pike's revision. They followed it with the magnifying lens. The original boundary gave the Bennett claim full control of the fault that fed the silver vein. Mara sat very still. "All of it?" Enough to make men impatient. She thought of Vale's clean hands on the bench. Pike's watch chain. The smelter chimneys smoking day and night. "How long have they known?" Wolf pointed to a notation. "Recent assay code. My father submitted samples 6 weeks ago. Who saw them? The smelter." Deputy Holloway witnessed the intake because Pa thought someone was shorting the weight. Wolf's eyes met hers. Holloway found the vein, and then he died. Outside, thunder moved along the range. 500 yards above the office cabin, Mercer Kane lay under a limestone shelf with his Sharps rifle wrapped in oiled canvas. He had followed them after Pike's office. He watched the yellow square of the window. Through the thin curtain, two silhouettes bent over a table. Kane cleaned his rifle receiver with a piece of white silk. He had learned long ago not to hate targets. Hatred made a man impatient. The syndicate paid him to make problems stop. Judge Vale's message had been short. The map is compromised. The Marshal is persistent. The Bennett woman remembers too much. Kane set the rear sight and waited for the light to go out. Inside, Wolf suddenly blew out the lamp. Mara froze. He held one finger to his lips. The room darkened except for the red glow of the stove. What? Wolf moved near the side wall, not the window. Someone has been uphill for 20 minutes. You saw him? No. Then how? The horses stopped eating. Mara listened. From the lean-to came no scrape of hooves, no chewing. A breath of cold air pushed through a crack in the wall. With it came lavender. She touched Wolf's sleeve. He's here. They worked without speaking. 2 chairs, blankets, hats. From the ridge, the shapes would look like sleeping figures near the table. Wolf opened a low storage hatch behind the stove. They crawled through into wet earth. The first shot came while Mara was on her stomach under the cabin. Not a rifle crack, a low, hard cough. Wood exploded above them. A second round punched through the wall. The chair meant to be Mara jerked backward. Wolf touched her shoulder and pointed uphill. They moved through drainage grass, bent low. More suppressed shots struck the cabin. Kane believed the targets were inside. For now, Mara led Wolf toward a split canyon. My father used to test echoes there. What kind? Bad ones. That might be good. The canyon narrowed into a stone corridor. Mara picked up a rock and threw it against the far wall. The clack multiplied. 1 impact became 3, then 5. Wolf understood. They separated. Kane entered 10 minutes later with another rifleman. The second man stepped on gravel. The canyon threw the sound behind him. He turned. Wolf came from the opposite shadow, hit the rifle barrel aside, and drove the man into the wall. Kane fired at the movement. The muzzle cough echoed everywhere. Mara dropped behind a boulder. A chunk of limestone burst inches from her face. She grabbed another stone and hurled it high to her left. Kane swung toward the false sound. Wolf crossed the open ground. The fight lasted seconds. It felt much longer. The second rifleman went down with a broken wrist. Kane escaped by climbing a shale chute before Wolf could close the distance. They captured the other man alive. His name, according to a pay chit in his pocket, was Louis Dane. Wolf packed Dane's bleeding thigh with yarrow from his saddle kit and tied the wound with a torn shirt. Dane watched him with bewildered hatred. You should have let me bleed. I need you conscious. You think I'll talk? No. Wolf nodded toward Mara, who was turning a small ledger over in her hands. I think you already did. The ledger contained numbers instead of names. At dawn, beneath a limestone overhang, Mara spread her father's old assay notes beside it. Coordinates, black crosses. She compared the claim numbers against the copied pages from Pike's office. One by one, they aligned. A miner died in a shaft collapse. 3 days later, Pike processed a transfer. A rancher disappeared on the trail. 5 days later, Vale approved a boundary revision. A widow sold cheaply after her husband's accident. The syndicate acquired her land the following week. Mara stopped at the last entry. Bennett claimed 47N, a date beside it. Tomorrow, she checked again. That's the execution date. Wolf looked over. The hanging is the transfer trigger. Pa's death clears the title. And your bond keeps you from challenging it until the court says the debt is paid. Mara shut the ledger. For a moment, the desert seemed entirely silent. Then Dane laughed weakly from where he lay tied near the fire. You don't know the half. Wolf crouched beside him. Dane's face had gone gray from blood loss. What half? Dane looked at Mara. Your deputy found ore moving through the Vale smelter under false labels. Thought he could tell the sheriff. He did tell him? Dane smiled with cracked lips. The sheriff reports to the judge. Mara felt sick. Who shot Holloway? Dane looked toward the rising light. Kane, from the upper shelf. Dane's eyes flicked back. That was enough. Whose rifle? Wolf asked. Dane closed his mouth. Mara opened the ledger. Judge Vale's claim code appears beside every clearing operation. Still nothing. She turned another page. These payments match Pike's land transfers. Dane stared at her. You were supposed to scrub floors. Mara looked down at her split knuckles. That was the useful part. They brought Dane to a remote federal way station rather than Black Rock. Wolf sent a telegram under seal requesting 2 deputies and an emergency stay of execution. The station agent watched him write, chewing a toothpick. How fast will it move? Wolf folded the form. Not fast enough. The smelter became their next stop because paper alone would allow Vale to claim forgery. They entered at shift change wearing canvas coats and soot-blackened scarves. Inside, the heat hit Mara like an opened furnace door. Stamp mills hammered ore until the floor trembled. Men shouted without being heard. Sparks rode the air. Everything tasted of metal. Wolf carried a crate to look like a delivery hand. Mara moved toward the sorting bins. Her father had taught her ore by color, grain, weight, and even smell when wet. She searched with bare fingertips. Gray quartz, milky quartz, copper staining, then blue. A tiny blue inclusion ran through a silver-rich stone. Samuel called it sky stone because the mineral showed like a piece of summer trapped in rock. It occurred only in one pocket they had ever found, the north cut of the Bennett claim. Mara slipped the sample into her pocket. A foreman spotted them. "You two, sorting crew only." Wolf set down the crate, federal inspection. The foreman slowed but did not stop. "We get notice for inspections, not mine." Wolf produced his badge and began asking questions about quarterly purity records in a tone so dry that even Mara nearly believed they had come for paperwork. The foreman argued. Wolf argued better. Mara moved behind a stack of empty ore sacks and reached the side door. Before she stepped through, she looked back. The foreman had gone pale, not because of the badge, because Wolf had pointed to the exact bin Mara searched. Outside, Mara leaned against the wall and drew a full breath of cold air. Wolf joined her 5 minutes later. "He'll send word to Vale." "I know. You plan that?" "I plan to make him choose between hiding the ore and warning his employer." "Which did he choose?" Wolf glanced at the chimney. He chose fear. They went next to a smith named Ezra Bell who had repaired sporting rifles for half the territory. Bell refused to speak when Wolf showed him the recovered Sharps casing. "Could be anybody's." Wolf placed his badge on the anvil. Bell scowled. "Stars don't change metal." "No," Wolf said, "but metal changes stories." Mara set the blue-flecked ore beside the casing. "Look at the lead." Bell sighed, reached for a loop and turned the casing under forge light. The base showed faint blue-gray contamination. Bell's expression tightened. "Antimony mix? Common?" Mara asked. "Not that shade." "Vale's? Smelter?" Bell looked toward the door. Wolf did not move. Bell lowered his voice. "Judge had custom long-range cartridges poured 2 months back. Brought his own lead. Said the standard factory rounds fouled his Sharps." "Who collected them?" Bell swallowed. "Mercer Kane." The forge breathed behind them. Bell touched the firing pin dent. "This mark isn't standard either. Slight crescent on the upper rim. I fitted a replacement pin for that rifle once. Vale wanted a harder tip. Wolf wrote it down. Will you testify?" Bell gave a short, bitter laugh. "Against Vale? Yes, I've got a wife." So did Deputy Halloway. Bell stared at the hot metal on his bench. "I'll think." On the street, Rose Halloway waited. She had removed the black veil but still wore mourning clothes. Without the veil, grief made her look older than Mara remembered. Her cheeks were hollow. Her left hand clenched a handkerchief. "You!" The word stopped Mara. People near the general store turned. Rose walked into the road. "You parade around with him while my husband is in the ground." Mara said nothing. "You think because a federal man bought your debt, your father becomes innocent?" Wolf remained several steps away. Mara could feel him choosing not to interfere. Rose's voice rose. "My children wake asking for Nathan. My table has 1 chair too many, and you." Her mouth trembled. Mara took the anger because there was nowhere else for Rose to put it. When the woman ran out of words, Mara asked, "Did Nathan say my father's name before he died?" Rose blinked. "What? Did he say Samuel shot him?" "You know what the sheriff said." "I'm asking what Nathan said." Rose's face changed, only a fraction. Mara stepped closer. "Did he say Pa's name?" Rose looked toward the boardwalk. "No." The street went quiet in Mara's mind. "What did he say?" Rose pressed the handkerchief to her lips. "I couldn't understand. Try." Rose's eyes filled, he said. "Maps." Mara waited. "And hound. I thought he meant a dog." "He kept saying the hound saw me. Then he said Vale Silver." Rose shut her eyes. "I told Sheriff Dugan. He said Nathan was delirious." Mara lowered her voice. "Did Nathan bring anything home before he died? Anything he was afraid to leave at the office?" Rose opened her eyes. She did not answer. Then she turned and walked away. That evening, Mara found Rose standing on the porch of the Halloway house. Wolf waited by the gate, far enough away to give them privacy and close enough to be useful. Rose let Mara inside. The parlor smelled of lye soap, damp wool, and biscuits baked too long. A child's wooden horse sat under a chair with one wheel missing. On the mantel stood a photograph of Nathan Halloway in a clean uniform, younger and thinner, trying not to smile. Rose sat without removing her coat. "He started checking wagon weights," she said. Said ore was leaving Vale's smelter heavier than the mine report showed. Mara listened. He thought somebody was moving silver under other claim numbers. He found a prospector dead 3 months ago. Everyone called it suicide. Rose opened her sewing basket. From beneath spools of thread, she removed a bundle of stained lace. Inside lay a steel firing pin. Mara did not touch it. Nathan found this near the dead man's rifle, Rose said. He said it didn't belong to that gun. Why keep it? Because he stopped trusting the sheriff. Mara finally picked it up. Near the head, a tiny crescent had been machined into the steel. Bell's description. Rose looked at her. If your father didn't do it. Mara waited. Rose's face crumpled, but she did not cry loudly. She only put one hand over her eyes. I stood in that square. I know. I let them put you on that platform. You didn't put me there. I wanted somebody to pay. Mara looked at Nathan's photograph. So did they. Rose lowered her hand. Who? Mara closed her fingers around the firing pin. We're going to prove it. Back at the office. Wolf set the pin beside the cartridge casing. The crescent matched. Mara watched him compare measurements with a caliper. Enough? To prove the cartridge came from a custom weapon, yes. To stop the hanging? Maybe. That isn't enough. No. Wolf opened another page in the Silent Hound's ledger. We need Kane. Mara thought of the rifleman escaping up the shale chute. Then we find him before he finds us. Judge Vale learned about Rose Holloway before midnight. Amos Pike arrived at his house pale and sweating despite the cold. Vale stood at the fireplace in shirt sleeves, burning papers one at a time. The widow gave them something, Pike said. What? I don't know. That phrase has become expensive, Amos. Pike flinched. Vale fed another paper to the fire. Where is Kane? He sent word from the ridge. And the first attempt failed. Vale stared into the flames. Pike's voice dropped. We can move the execution. Vale turned at sunrise instead of noon. Local authority allows it. Do it. And the marshal? Vale looked at the last sheet in his hand. It was a copy of the Bennett survey. He let the corner catch fire. Kane will handle the marshal. What about the girl? Vale watched the red line of fire move across the map. The same. By dawn, Wolf and Mara were already on the mountain. Dane's ledger contained a coordinate that matched an abandoned Bennett exploration tunnel above Devil's Throat. Samuel had stopped using it years earlier after finding rotten supports. Mara suspected the hounds used it for storage. They rode without talking. Halfway up the pass, the lead horse shied. Wolf lifted one hand. A low rifle cough came from the cedar line. Dust burst beside the horse's foreleg. Mara and Wolf threw themselves from the saddles. A second shot struck the pack roll. High right, Wolf said. Mara listened to the echoes. No, that's what he wants. She pointed left toward a shelf hidden behind dead cedar. Wolf trusted her. They moved downslope. Kane fired again at their abandoned position. Mara crawled through needle grass until she reached an old drainage cut. This way. The cut fed into the abandoned tunnel. Inside, the light vanished quickly. Wolf struck a match. Mara blew it out. What? Gas pocket. Seed smelled the air, a faint, sweet rot, methane. They continued in darkness. Mara ran her fingertips along the wall. The rail beneath her boots told her where the tunnel turned. Behind them, voices entered. Kane had brought men. Wolf whispered, how far? To the old hoist shaft. Can you see it? No, then how? My father made me walk this tunnel blind when I was 16. Wolf stopped. Mara almost walked into him. He did what? He thought I depended too much on lanterns. A pause. Your father sounds difficult. He is. Wolf's quiet breath might have been a laugh. They moved on. The tunnel opened into a chamber. A weak orange lamp burned on a crate. Mara had never seen it there before. Stacks of ammunition boxes lined the wall. False survey stones, blank deeds. Crates of blue-flecked ore stamped with other claim numbers. On a rack lay 3 long Sharps rifles. Wolf took one cartridge from an open box. He turned the base toward the light. The same crescent primer mark. Mara stared. This is everything. No. Wolf's eyes went to the tunnel behind them. It is enough to make them kill us for certain. Boots scraped stone. Kane's voice carried through the dark. You could have walked away, Marshal. Wolf handed Mara the ledger and the firing pin. Back pocket. She tucked them away. What are you doing? Buying you distance. No. Mara, don't send me backward now. Wolf looked at her, then at the narrow ventilation bore above the old shaft. Fine. Get behind the hoist and stay where I can see you. She pointed to a narrow ventilation bore above the old shaft. Gas collects there. He followed her gaze. Understanding passed between them. Kane entered the chamber with his rifle raised. 2 men spread behind him. Wolf stood in view near the ore crates. Kane smiled faintly. You have a habit of standing where bullets go. I have a habit of arresting men who shoot them. Kane shifted the rifle. Mara crouched behind the hoist and struck a match. Not yet. One of Kane's men stepped nearer the ventilation bore. Wolf moved left. The rifle followed him. Mara tossed a small chunk of rock into the darkness behind the men. Kane glanced toward the sound. Wolf fired once into the ground near the vent. The concussion pushed gas toward the flame. Mara dropped the match and threw herself flat. The blast was not enormous. It was enough. A hard orange flash punched through the chamber. Dust, wood splinters, and old canvas erupted into the air. One hound ran. The other went down. Kane's rifle struck the floor. Wolf crossed the room before the smoke cleared. Kane reached for a sidearm. Wolf kicked it away and drove him against the ore crate. Mara crawled out coughing. Her ears rang. Kane lay on his back with Wolf's knee against his arm. For the first time, the professional rifleman looked untidy. Blood ran from a cut above his eyebrow. Dust whitened his hair. Mara stood over him. "Did you shoot Nathan Halloway?" Kane smiled. "You need me to say it?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because his wife deserves to hear it." The smile faded. Wolf pulled Kane's wrists behind him and locked irons around them. Kane looked at the evidence crates. "You think a judge lets this into his courtroom?" Wolf tightened the cuffs. "He won't be judge over the federal hearing." Kane's eyes narrowed. "What hearing?" Wolf pulled him upright. "The one you're going to survive long enough to attend." They emerged from the mine into a thin gray dawn. Black rock lay in the valley below. Far away, faint but unmistakable, came the wooden clack of a gallows trap being tested. Once, then again. Mara stopped walking. "No." Wolf looked toward town. The execution bell had not rung. "It was noon," Mara said. Kane gave a dry laugh. Wolf's face went still. He moved it. Mara turned to him. "How long?" "Less than 2 hours if we ride hard. With Kane, we take him." Kane's smile returned. "You'll never make it." Mara stepped close enough that he had to look at her. "My father taught me every path down this mountain." She took the lead rope from Wolf. "Try to keep up." They did not take the main wagon road. Mara led them down a dry wash, where the horses had to pick their way over loose stone, then through a stand of piñons so tight that Kane cursed each time a branch slapped his face. His wrists were cuffed in front and looped to the saddle horn. Wolf rode behind him with the Sharp's rifle tied across his own pack. The sun had not yet cleared the eastern ridge. Black rock appeared below in pieces. First the smelter chimney, then the church roof, then the courthouse cupola, all of it washed the color of cold ash. A bell began to ring. Mara's stomach dropped. Not the church bell, the jail bell. 3 slow strikes. Wolf touched his heels to the bay. They descended hard. By the time they reached the outskirts, sweat had darkened the horses' necks despite the morning chill. A milk wagon swerved out of their way. Chickens scattered beneath a porch. A woman carrying bread stopped in the street and stared at Kane, who looked more dangerous in handcuffs than most men looked armed. At the first crossroad, Wolf reined in. "Court records office," he said. Mara looked toward the square. "My father. I will get to the gallows. You need the papers. So do you." He pointed to Kane. "I need the arrest witnessed and the evidence entered. Arthur Bell, the deputy clerk. Find him. Get the original Bennett claim filing and Halloway's initial incident report if it still exists. If Pike already destroyed them, then get Arthur." Mara hated the instruction because it made sense. Wolf dismounted, pulled Kane down, and marched him toward the center of town. Mara took the mare and rode for the records building. The streets were nearly empty because everyone was at the hanging. That helped. The records office door was locked. Mara hammered on it. "Arthur." Nothing. She tried the side door, locked. She went around back and found a narrow window open 6 inches for air. "Arthur." A face appeared. Arthur Bell was a thin man in his 30s with hair that never lay flat in ink on the first 2 fingers of his right hand. He was not related to Ezra Bell the smith, though both had spent years correcting strangers on that fact. He looked terrified. "Mara, what are you doing here?" "Open the door." "I can't." "Why?" "Commissioner's order." "Open the door." "They've sealed the records until after the execution." That answer was worse than a refusal. Mara put both hands on the sill. "Arthur, Nathan Halloway was murdered because he found falsified surveys. My father is being hanged to clear the title. We have the man who fired the shot." Arthur's face drained. "No, we have him in irons. You shouldn't say these things. I have the Silent Hound's ledger." Arthur stepped back from the window as if the words were contagious. Mara reached into her coat and held up the little book. "You know these symbols?" He did. She saw it. Arthur swallowed. "Put that away." "Open the door." "Mara." Your initials are in Pike's transfer ledger. His mouth opened. She softened her voice. I don't think you killed anyone. He looked toward the street. I think you witnessed paperwork you were afraid to challenge. Still nothing. The question is whether you are going to stay afraid until another man dies. Arthur closed the window. Mara's heart sank. Then she heard bolts sliding. The rear door opened. 2 minutes, he whispered. Inside, the records room felt colder than outside. Shelves climbed to the ceiling, packed with rolled maps and boxes of deeds tied in twine. The only lamp burned low. Arthur kept looking toward the front door. The Bennett original is not here. Where? Pike took it. Holloway's report? Arthur rubbed his mouth. He filed 2. Mara stared. The sheriff submitted one to court. Nathan came here the night before he died and filed another under federal mining irregularities. Where is it? Arthur pointed to the floor. Beneath a loose board near his desk sat a metal dispatch box. I hid it. Why? Because the next morning Sheriff Dugan came asking for everything Nathan had filed. He already knew the document number. I gave him the court copy and said the federal copy had been misfiled. Mara knelt while Arthur unlocked the box. Inside were envelopes, duplicate seals, and a thin packet marked with Holloway's hand. She read the first page. Suspected unlawful ore transfer. Bennett claim 47N, Vale Smelting Company. Survey discrepancies. A hired marksman observed near Devil's Throat. Her fingers shook. At the bottom, Nathan had written one sentence twice. If harm comes to me, do not release this report to county authority. Mara looked up. Why didn't you send it federal? Arthur's face reddened with shame. I meant to. Then he died. Then Judge Vale came here himself. He asked whether Nathan had left anything. He knew my wife's brother was behind on a loan. He knew my boy had pneumonia last winter and I owed the doctor. He threatened you. He didn't have to. Arthur sat down hard in his chair. He said people with families should understand the value of stability. Mara folded the report carefully. Come with me. Arthur recoiled. To the square? Yes, no, you hid this for a reason. To keep it safe. Safe is not the same as useful. He looked ill. Mara waited. Outside, the jail bell struck again. Arthur stood. He took his coat from a peg with hands that would not stop trembling. Let me get the seal. At the gallows, Samuel Bennett was trying to find his daughter in a crowd he could barely see. The platform boards were new. He could smell sap where the carpenter had cut them. The rope smelled of hemp and grease. Sheriff Dugan read the warrant. Judge Vale stood under the courthouse awning in a black coat. Commissioner Pike remained beside him, whispering to 2 town guards. Rose Holloway stood near the front. She had come because grief demanded witnesses. Yet when Samuel was led from the jail in shackles, she did not feel the satisfaction she expected. He looked old, not dangerous. His white hair had been combed with water. Someone had buttoned his shirt wrong at the collar. Rose remembered Nathan at the kitchen table, Vale silver. The hound saw me. She looked at Judge Vale. He was checking his watch. Samuel stumbled on the gallows step. The executioner caught his arm. Samuel looked toward the blur of faces. Mara? No answer came. The sheriff asked whether he wished to say anything. Samuel licked dry lips. I didn't kill Nathan Holloway. A man in the crowd groaned. Samuel went on. I was angry with him. We argued. I called him a thief because I thought his survey was wrong. It wasn't him that was wrong. Vale made a small gesture. The sheriff reached for the hood. A voice came from the edge of the square. Hold the warrant. People turned. Elias Wolf walked into the open space leading Mercer Kane by a chain. Kane's coat was torn. His face was bruised. His expensive boots were covered in mine mud. A murmur moved through the crowd. Judge Vale's face did not. Marshal, he said, you are interfering with a lawful execution. Wolf stopped 20 feet from the gallows. I am staying it. On whose order? Federal authority pending prosecution for murder, conspiracy, falsification of mineral records, and obstruction of a federal investigation. Vale smiled without warmth. You have no writ. Wolf pulled a folded telegram from his coat. Emergency stay. Territorial Federal Magistrate, Mesa District. Received at the way station before dawn. Pike's head snapped toward Vale. Vale's jaw tightened. Sheriff Dugan descended from the platform. I answer to this court. Wolf held out the telegram. You also answer to the United States when a protected federal witness is about to be executed under a compromised proceeding. Witness? Dugan said. Samuel Bennett. Laughter broke from somewhere in the crowd. Wolf looked toward the sound. It stopped. Kane shifted beside him. Vale pointed. And what is that supposed to be? Mercer Kane. Wanted under 3 aliases in Nevada and New Mexico. Arrested this morning in an unregistered mine cache containing false deeds, syndicate ammunition, and ore relabeled from the Bennett claim. Kane stared at the ground. Vale's voice stayed calm. An outlaw found in a mine proves nothing about the Holloway murder. A horse came fast from the East Street. Mara pulled up near the records office corner and jumped down before the mare stopped completely. Arthur Bell followed on foot, clutching a metal dispatch box to his chest. Mara entered the square. For one strange second, she saw herself 3 days earlier standing on the auction platform. Same courthouse. Same crowd, different posture. Judge Vale noticed the box. That was the first time Mara saw fear touch him. She walked to Wolf. Arthur stopped behind her. Mara held up Holloway's report. Nathan filed a duplicate before he died. Rose Holloway's hand rose to her mouth. Mara looked at her, then at the sheriff. He wrote that ore from my father's claim was being moved through Vale Smelting under false numbers. He wrote that he had observed a professional marksman near Devil's Throat, and he ordered the report kept from county authority if anything happened to him. Sheriff Dugan looked at Arthur. The clerk's voice nearly failed. I witnessed the filing. Vale snapped. A frightened clerk and a bonded servant are not evidence. Arthur flinched. Mara did not. Wolf lifted one of the seized Sharps cartridges. This is. Vale looked at Kane. Kane finally looked back. There was no loyalty in his face, only calculation. Wolf continued. The bullet recovered from Holloway was a .45-90, not the .44-40 entered in the county trial record. The firing pin impression carries a custom crescent. Ezra Bell fitted that pin to a Sharps rifle owned by Judge Vale. Mrs. Holloway retained the original replacement component recovered by her husband at an earlier killing site. The crowd changed, not loudly. Bodies shifted. Eyes moved from Samuel to Vale. Pike whispered, "This is madness." Rose stepped forward. No. Everyone looked at her. She faced Sheriff Dugan. Nathan never named Samuel. The sheriff's mouth opened. Rose kept going. He said maps. He said hound. He said Vale Silver. I told you that. Dugan looked trapped. You said he was delirious. You decided that. The executioner had not removed the noose from Samuel's neck. Mara saw it. Take that off him. The executioner looked at Vale. Mara's voice sharpened. Take it off. Wolf did not raise his voice. The stay is in effect. Sheriff Dugan climbed the steps and removed the rope. Samuel sagged so suddenly that the rail caught him. Mara went up. She put both hands on his face. His skin was cold despite the morning heat. Pa. He blinked. Mara, I'm here. I heard your voice. I know. Did you find the North Line? She laughed and cried at once, a small sound she tried to swallow. Yes. Samuel closed his eyes. I knew it was there. The federal hearing began 3 hours later because Vale refused to surrender the courthouse, and Wolf refused to let him control the delay. A federal circuit magistrate named Helen Voss arrived from Mesa by noon with 2 deputy marshals and a court reporter. She was a compact woman in her 50s who removed her traveling coat, asked for black coffee, and began issuing orders before the dust settled on her boots. Judge Vale discovered that a bench looked different when he was seated below it. He retained his title for the moment. He did not retain control. Samuel sat at the defense table without shackles. Mara sat beside Wolf with evidence arranged in labeled cloth packets. The room was hotter than it had been at the trial. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls. Magistrate Voss began with the ballistics. Wolf did not tell a dramatic story. He measured. He hung a plumb line over a diagram of Devil's Throat. He marked the bloodstain. He marked the sniper shelf. He gave distances. He described wind direction from the weather log at the smelter. He showed the .45-90 casing, the custom firing pin, Bell's signed statement, and the ammunition seized from the mine cache. Vale's attorney objected repeatedly. Voss allowed some objections and denied others. Mara watched Vale. He seemed calmer whenever lawyers argued theory. He became less calm when objects appeared: steel, brass, or paper. Things that could not be intimidated. Ezra Bell testified after lunch. His apron still smelled of forged smoke. He held the firing pin under the courtroom magnifier and explained the crescent machining. Could another rifle produce a similar mark? Vale's attorney asked. Similar, yes. So this does not prove Judge Vale's rifle fired the fatal round. Not by itself. The attorney smiled. Bell continued. But Judge Vale ordered a harder replacement pin with this exact crescent because the first one was deforming primers. I filed the old one smooth and cut the new face myself. The smile disappeared. Did you record the work? Bell pulled a grease-stained repair ledger from his pocket. I record everything. Mara almost smiled. Next came the ore. She took the stand. Vale's attorney stood. You are the daughter of the condemned man, the formerly condemned man. A faint sound moved through the gallery. The attorney frowned. You have a personal interest in this matter. Yes. So your testimony is not neutral. No one's grief is neutral. Stone is. Voss looked over her glasses. Explain the stone, Ms. Bennett. Mara placed the blue-flecked sample on the evidence tray. She described the rare azurite inclusion. She described the north cut where Samuel first found it. She showed assay notes from years earlier and recent smelter records copied from Pike's office. The attorney objected to the copied records. Mara produced the original red ledger. Pike went white. Wolf had taken it under warrant while Mara was at the records office. The room grew still. Mara opened to a page. Bin S14 was reported as ore from Vale North 3. The sample we took from that bin contains the same blue inclusion and trace pattern as Claim 47N. Are you a formally trained geologist? No. Then you are offering speculation. Samuel shifted beside the table. Mara looked at her father. He gave the smallest nod. She turned back. My father taught me to assay by hand before I was tall enough to reach the upper shelf in our cabin. But you don't need to trust me. The Federal Assay Office tested both samples this morning. Wolf handed the report to the clerk. The attorney sat down. Commissioner Amos Pike spent the entire afternoon sweating through his collar. When Arthur Bell took the stand, Pike stopped looking at him. Arthur authenticated Nathan Halloway's hidden report. He authenticated the original claim registry index. He authenticated his own initials on 3 transfers linked to deaths listed in the Hound's ledger. Did Commissioner Pike instruct you to alter records? Voss asked. Arthur stood. No, Voss looked at him. Sit down, Commissioner. He is lying. Sit down. Pike remained standing. Wolf did not move. Pike sat. Arthur's voice gained a little strength. He told me to backdate 2 surveys. He said Judge Vale had reviewed the corrections. Vale's attorney rose. Did Judge Vale personally speak to you once? When? The morning after Deputy Halloway died. The room seemed to shrink. What did he say? Arthur looked at Vale. He asked whether Nathan had filed anything outside county channels. Vale gave him a look so cold that Arthur almost stopped. Mara saw it. So did Magistrate Voss. Arthur continued. Told me men with families should value stability. Rose Halloway made a small sound. The final witness of the day was Mercer Kane. He entered under guard. People leaned forward. Kane looked freshly washed but not respectable. A strip of cloth covered the cut above his eyebrow. His hands were cuffed. Voss reminded him that no immunity had been promised. Kane smiled. I know how bargains work. Wolf watched him. Mara could not tell whether Kane would speak. Vale could. Something moved in the judge's face. Kane took the stand. Did you shoot Deputy Nathan Halloway? Voss asked. Kane looked toward Rose. For once, there was no mockery in him. Yes. Rose stopped breathing. Mara watched her grip the bench. Under whose instruction? Vale's attorney stood. Objection. The witness is a confessed murderer seeking advantage. Voss looked at Kane. Are you seeking advantage? Always. Objection noted. Answer. Kane looked at Judge Vale. Commissioner Pike delivered the order. Said it came from higher. Pike shot to his feet. You bastard. Kane smiled. That's better. I was getting bored. Pike pointed at Vale. He wrote the payment authorization. The courtroom erupted. Vale's attorney grabbed Pike's sleeve. Pike tore away. He signed it. Ask him about the private account in Prescott. Ask him why the Bennett transfer was prepared before the verdict. Vale rose slowly. Amos. Pike looked at him. Whatever promise had bound them ended in that look. You said the federal office would never come, Pike whispered. Vale's face hardened. Pike turned toward Voss. The claim was worth millions. No one made a sound. Pike laughed weakly. You think this town was built on honesty? Every man in this room wanted the smelter open. They wanted wages. They wanted roads. They wanted a rail spur. Bennett sat on the vein and wouldn't sell. Samuel spoke from the defense table. No one asked me after the assay. Pike looked at him. We knew what you'd say. That sentence did more damage than a confession prepared by a lawyer. Samuel stared at him. You were going to hang me because you thought I'd say no? Pike's shoulders dropped. Vale moved. Not toward the door. Toward the evidence table. Mara saw his hand disappear under his coat. She shouted, Wolf. Everyone else seemed to move late. Vale pulled a small pistol. Wolf did not reach for his revolver. He kicked the leg of the evidence table. The heavy oak edge slammed into Vale's knee. The shot went into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. One deputy seized Vale's arm. Another drove him against the rail. The pistol skittered across the floor and stopped near Rosa Halloway's shoe. She looked down at it. then at Vale. You killed him. Vale's cheek was pressed against the wood. His composure had finally cracked. He would have ruined everything. Rose stepped closer. My husband? Vale shut his mouth. Mara felt Rose's grief change in front of her, not vanish. Grief did not vanish because a culprit was named. It simply found its proper address. Rose picked up the black handkerchief she had dropped and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. By sunset, Vale Pike, Sheriff Dugan, and Mercer Kane were all in separate cells under federal guard. Samuel Bennett sat on the courthouse steps eating stew from a tin bowl. Someone from the hotel kitchen had brought it. He complained that it needed salt. Mara sat beside him. 3 days in jail and you're a food critic. I was a food critic before jail. You ate beans from a pan with a horseshoe nail once. I was busy. His hand searched the step. Mara placed the spoon in it. He ate another bite. For several minutes, neither spoke. The square was nearly empty now. Workers had begun dismantling the gallows. A blacksmith struck the iron brackets loose with a hammer. Each blow rang through the cooling air. Samuel listened. Good sound. Mara looked at the platform. Yes, he set the bowl aside. I'm sorry. For what, you know, she did. The auction. The claim. Her name in a debt ledger. Pa, you didn't write the law. I brought you to this town. You brought me to a mountain. Same mistake, some days. She leaned her shoulder against his. His coat smelled of jail soap and dust. I would have stayed on the claim, he said. If they'd offered honest money, I still would have stayed. I know. Your mother hated that about me. She hated that you stored blasting caps in the flower cupboard. That was once, twice. Samuel smiled, then his face tightened. What happens to you now? Mara looked toward the marshal's office. I don't know. The answer unsettled her more than she expected. For days, every choice had been made against a clock. Now the clock had stopped. The next afternoon, Wolf placed the restitution bond on his desk. The office had been cleaned sometime during the hearing, though badly. Someone had swept dust into a visible line near the wall. The coffee pot remained black. Mara stood across from him. Wolf opened the bond. He had drawn a single line through the service clause. Below it was a federal notation dissolving the arrangement on grounds of fraudulent prosecution and satisfied civil settlement. He signed. Then he turned the paper toward her. The bond is void. Mara read the sentence twice. That's it, that's it. No judge's speech? No. No bell? No. She touched the page. Her name looked small. What happens to the silver you paid? I petition for recovery. And if they refuse, I become slightly poorer. Mara gave him a look. Much poorer? Enough to regret feeding your horse. My horse eats less than yours. That is not true. It was the closest they had come to an ordinary argument. Mara signed the acknowledgement. Wolf took the document, sanded the ink, and filed it. Then he brought out a second case. Inside lay a plain marshal's star. A small Federal Service badge marked Investigative Clerk. Mara stared at it. What is that? A job? You're offering me employment? Yes. Because I can mop? You are mediocre with a mop. She laughed before she could stop herself. Wolf continued. You read surveys. You remember terrain. You notice physical evidence. You ask witnesses questions without making them feel interrogated. Rose Holloway would disagree. She gave you the firing pin. Mara picked up the badge. It was cool and heavier than it looked. What does it pay? Wolf named the salary. Mara's eyebrows rose. That much? No lodging allowance. Then it's not that much. A faint line appeared at the corner of his mouth. You negotiate. My father taught me. I thought he taught you rocks. He also taught me not to accept the first ore price. Mara set the badge down. I need to speak to him. Do that. You're not going to tell me I belong on the trail? No. Why not? Because then you might accept for the wrong reason. The answer stayed with her all the way to the claim. Samuel had been home less than a day and had already rearranged the porch. He sat on a stool sharpening a drill bit by touch, though Mara had told him not to work until the doctor examined his ribs. You're doing it wrong, she said. I've sharpened steel longer than you've been alive. You can't see the edge. I can feel it. She took the file from him. That is exactly the kind of sentence that put blasting caps in the flower cupboard. Samuel sighed and let her work. The cabin had been searched while they were gone. Drawers stood open. Papers had been dumped from the cedar chest. Someone had torn the mattress seam looking for survey records. Mara filed the drill bit slowly. Wolf offered me a job. Samuel stopped rubbing his hands. What kind? Investigative clerk. That's all? What do you want me to say? I don't know. Them is efficient. She nudged his boot with hers. He travels. I assumed. He says there are other syndicate cases. Also assumed. I'd be gone. Samuel reached for the coffee mug beside him, found it on the second try, and drank. The words hurt. He heard it in her silence. Not that way, he said. Mara looked down at the file. Samuel set the mug aside. When your mother died, I made this claim the whole world because I knew how to do that. Dig, cook badly, keep you fed. Tell myself the mountain was enough for 2 people. You did keep me fed. Barely. We had beans. We always had beans. He smiled, then grew serious. You learned the mountain because it was what I had to teach. That doesn't mean you owe it your entire life. Mara worked the file once more across the steel. What about you? I am old, difficult, half-blind, and apparently owner of a valuable silver claim. You forgot stubborn. I included difficult. You need help. I can hire help now. With what money? Samuel pointed toward the ridge. If your maps are right, quite a lot. Mara laughed. He reached out. She put her hand in his. You were never payment, he said. I know. I need you to know it when you leave here, too. Mara looked toward the trail descending to Black Rock. The job frightened her. That mattered. The claim no longer frightened her. That mattered, too. 2 days later, Amos Pike returned to the Bennett property under guard, not as commissioner. He came with 3 town councilmen and a federal deputy because the Provisional Council wanted to purchase the claim before outside investors could. Pike's wrists were ironed. He looked smaller without his cream vest. One councilman did the speaking. The town is prepared to make a generous offer. Samuel sat on the porch. Mara stood beside him. The councilman named a sum. It was more money than Samuel had seen in his life. Mara looked at him. Samuel scratched his beard. No. The councilman blinked. We can increase. No, Mr. Bennett, with respect, you may not understand the development costs. Samuel smiled. My daughter handles numbers. Everyone looked at Mara. She took the written offer. We understand it. The councilman brightened. Then perhaps, we're not selling. Pike looked at her for the first time. Anger surfaced through his exhaustion. You'll ruin the town out of spite. Mara folded the paper. No, we'll lease extraction rights under independent assay and public weights. The councilman stared. Samuel's smile widened. Mara continued. Local workers get priority. Waste runoff is contained. The northern spring stays untouched. 10% of net claim income goes to a fund for families of miners killed in uninvestigated accidents over the last 5 years. Pike laughed. You think you can dictate? The federal deputy tugged his chain. Pike stopped. Mara looked at him. You dictated when you had power. I'm proposing terms while we own the ground. The councilmen exchanged glances. One said, that is unusual. So was trying to hang the owner. No one had a quick answer. They left with the offer still folded in Mara's hand. Samuel waited until the horses disappeared. You planned that, a little. You didn't tell me about the 10%. Do you object? No. Then stop smiling. I'm allowed to enjoy good bargaining. Mara sat beside him. Wolf says there may be a case near Tucson. Samuel nodded. I'm leaving tomorrow. I know. This time the words did not hurt. They sat until the light went gold on the ridge. Before dawn, Mara packed. Not much. 2 dresses. Work trousers she wore under a long coat when riding, 3 shirts, her mother's sewing kit, Samuel's old magnifying glass, the notebook containing the hound's cipher, a small rock of blue-flecked quartz. She found the auction satchel under the bed. For several minutes, she held it. Then she packed that too. At the bottom of the cedar chest lay her father's first-hand hammer, the handle smooth from decades of use. She left it. Some tools belonged to the place that made them. Wolf arrived at sunrise leading a spare horse. Mara carried her chest to the porch. Samuel hugged her awkwardly. He had never been good at embraces. His elbows seemed to arrive at different times. Right, I will, not federal reports. Letters, I know what letters are. Eat, you eat. Don't let him feed you those beans. Mara looked at Wolf. He heard that. Good. Wolf pretended to adjust the saddle. Samuel touched Mara's face. His fingers found her brow, her cheek, the line of her jaw. I wish I could see you better. Mara swallowed. You see enough. He nodded. Then he turned toward Wolf's voice. Marshal, Mr. Bennett, if she gets shot, I will be unhappy. Samuel barked a laugh. That's not what I was going to say. I know. Mara climbed into the saddle. As they rode away, she looked back once. Samuel stood on the porch with one hand raised. The ridge behind him caught the first sunlight. Mara turned forward. The trail smelled of frost and horse leather. Wolf rode beside her, not ahead. They had gone less than 2 miles when he said, Someone is following us. Mara did not look back. How many? 3, maybe 4. Kane's men? Possibly. What do you want to do? Wolf glanced at her. It was a simple question, not an order. Mara studied the terrain. The road entered a narrow cedar break ahead. Loose stone covered the slope on the left. A dry channel ran below on the right. We keep riding. Why? Because they expect you to stop at the trees. Wolf nodded. They rode past the cedar break. A suppressed shot coughed behind them. The bullet struck the road where Wolf would have been if he had halted at the obvious cover. Mara smiled without humor. Predictable. Two riders appeared on the ridge. Wolf and Mara dropped into the dry channel. The fight that followed was not heroic. It was dusty, loud in brief ugly bursts and confusing. Mara's horse nearly fell. Wolf lost his hat. One mercenary fired too fast and jammed his rifle. Mara used the channel wall to circle behind a boulder and shouted a false direction, drawing another shooter toward Wolf's line. Within minutes, 2 men surrendered and 1 fled with a wounded arm. The 4th had never joined the shooting. He rode away as soon as the first bullet missed. Wolf stood in the road afterward, retrieving his hat. There was a hole through the brim. Mara looked at it. Improvement. He put it on. You are becoming difficult. My father says that's hereditary. They delivered the prisoners to the next federal station. By Tuesday, word of the Black Rock scandal had reached every mining camp between Prescott and the border. A reporter from the Territorial Gazette caught them at the telegraph office. He had a sweat-darkened collar and carried a pencil stub behind one ear. Marshal Wolf, Miss Bennett, just one question. Wolf kept writing. Mara waited. The reporter unfolded a proof sheet. Is it true the Apache Marshal purchased a white woman at public auction, then used her to expose the largest mining conspiracy in the district? The telegraph clerk stopped pretending not to listen. Mara held out her hand. May I see that? The reporter hesitated, then gave her the proof. She read the headline. Savage Lauman buys Minner's daughter, breaks silver ring. Mara felt heat rise behind her eyes. Wolf's face did not change. She took the reporter's pencil. What are you doing? Correcting it. She crossed out Savage. She crossed out Buoys. She crossed out several other words. The reporter sputtered. You can't edit my copy. You asked us a question. I asked if the story was true. No. He looked offended. The public loves a strong angle. The public can love accurate nouns. She wrote beneath the headline, Federal investigation ex post land fraud after wrongful conviction. The reporter stared. That won't sell half as many papers. Mara handed back the sheet. Then print a lie and explain it to the magistrate when your description interferes with jury selection. The telegraph clerk coughed to hide a laugh. The reporter looked at Wolf. Marshal, do you have a comment? Wolf finished his message. Yes. The reporter readied the pencil. She is my investigative clerk. The man waited. That's all? That is the comment. Outside, Mara walked half a block before laughing. Wolf looked at her. What? Investigative clerk. That is your title. You sounded as if you were announcing a military rank. It is on federal payroll. Very romantic. Wolf almost stumbled. Mara realized what she had said. They both looked straight ahead. A wagon rolled past, loaded with hay. Neither spoke for 20 yards. Then Wolf said, There is nothing romantic about federal payroll. Mara laughed harder. The case near Tucson lasted 6 weeks and involved forged water rights rather than silver. No one was hanged. Mara considered that an improvement. She learned how to take sworn statements, how to seal evidence packets with wax, how to read expense rules written by men who had clearly never slept on the ground, and how to make coffee that Wolf would drink without grimacing. Wolf taught her to shoot a revolver only after making her spend 2 days learning how not to touch one. Most gun mistakes happen before a trigger moves, he said. Mara practiced loading and unloading until she could do it by touch. She was not a natural marksman. This pleased her more than she expected. She did not want every useful thing about her to involve violence. At night they stayed in way stations, cheap rooms, ranch bunkhouses, and once beneath an overturned wagon during a storm. They did not speak much about Black Rock. They did not need to. The first letter from Samuel arrived in Tucson, folded around an assay receipt. Mara, you were right about the North Spring. I hired 2 brothers from Globe to brace the lower cut. One talks too much and the other sings badly. I am therefore not lonely. Rose Halloway came by. She brought biscuits. They were overbaked. I ate 4. The council accepted the safety fund condition after pretending it was their idea. Your room remains a mess even when you are not here. Write something that is not a report. Pa. Mara read it twice. Wolf sat across the table cleaning dust from a map case. Good news? My father hired singers. Wolf nodded as if that explained everything. Mara began a reply. She wrote about a woman in Tucson who kept 6 goats behind a hotel. She wrote about Wolf's ruined hat. She did not write that some evenings she missed the mountain so sharply that the smell of hot stone could make her throat ache. She did not write that leaving had not severed home from her. It had enlarged it. Months later, the Black Rock federal trial ended. Pike accepted a plea in exchange for testimony about financial accounts. Sheriff Dugan was convicted of obstruction and falsifying evidence. Mercer Kane was convicted of Nathan Holloway's murder and 2 additional killings tied to the Hound's ledger. Judge Alistair Vale fought every charge. He accused witnesses. He attacked jurisdiction. He claimed Pike had acted alone. He claimed the rifle had been stolen. He claimed Holloway's report was forged. Then federal accountants found the Prescott account. Payment dates matched deaths. Transfer dates matched payments. Vale was convicted. The telegram reached Mara at a dusty rail office near Gila Bend. She read it standing under a buzzing lamp. Wolf waited. Well, guilty. He nodded. Mara folded the telegram. She expected triumph. Instead, she thought of Rose's child's wooden horse beneath the chair. She thought of Nathan writing 2 copies because one law office could no longer be trusted. She thought of her father under a rope. Does it feel finished? Wolf asked. No. Good. She looked at him. Good? Finished things are often stories people tell because they are tired. That sounds unpleasantly wise. My mother said it. Then she was wise. She was also unpleasant when correct. Mara smiled. What happens to Vale? Prison labor at Yuma. The irony sat between them. A judge who had turned labor into punishment for the innocent would spend years under a real sentence. Mara found no joy in imagining it. Only balance. That winter she returned to Black Rock. The gallows was gone. In its place, the town had built a produce market under a long wooden awning. On Saturday mornings, farmers sold onions, eggs, chilies, soap, and dried fruit where Mara had once stood on the auction platform. She walked through it carrying a paper sack of coffee. No one mentioned the auction. That irritated her at first. Then she understood that towns survived partly by pretending their shame had happened to someone else. Rose Holloway did not pretend. She met Mara near the old courthouse steps. Rose wore gray now instead of black. How long are you staying? 3 days. Your father says 5. My father lies about schedules. Rose almost smiled. I made biscuits. Pa wrote about them. He said they were overbaked. He ate 4. That man. They stood awkwardly. Then Rose said Nathan's report got his name cleared at the department. I heard. They're giving me his back pay. I'm glad. Rose looked toward the market. I still hated your father for a while. Mara nodded. I know. I knew he was innocent and still hated him. Mara waited. Grief doesn't become intelligent just because facts arrive, Rose said. No. Rose looked at her. Thank you for asking what Nathan said. Mara felt the old firing pin in memory, cold against her palm. Thank you for keeping what he found. They walked to Rose's house together. The biscuits were overbaked again. Mara ate 3. Samuel had changed the cabin, not much. A second handrail ran along the porch because his sight had worsened. New shelves held labeled ore samples. A hired cook named Mrs. Finch had moved the blasting caps out of every food cupboard and apparently threatened Samuel with bodily harm if he returned them. Mara approved immediately. The claim produced steady silver, not the impossible river of wealth Pike had imagined. The vein was rich but difficult. Extraction costs were high. Safety rules slowed work. Samuel liked that. Fast minds bury men, he said. The compensation fund paid 6 widows in its first year. One Saturday, Mara walked with Samuel to the north boundary. He held her elbow on uneven ground. At the cedar post marking the restored line, he stopped. Is the red flag still there? Yes. Faded? Very. Good. Why good? Means it's been standing long enough to fade. Mara looked across the ridge. Wolf waited farther down the trail, giving them time. Samuel ran his hand over the boundary post. I thought silver was the legacy. Mara said nothing. He smiled. Old men are stupid. Frequently. I heard that. I intended you to. He squeezed her arm. The silver will run out. Yes. The paper may burn. Yes. What stayed? Mara looked at his hand on the cedar. People know what happened. For now, they also changed the claim rules. Samuel turned his cloudy eyes toward her voice. You did that. We did. He shook his head. No. I dug a hole for 30 years. You made them count the bodies. Mara swallowed. Wind moved through the scrub. The mountain did not sing. It breathed in small ordinary sounds. Grass against stone, leather creaking, a hawk somewhere above the ridge. When they returned to the cabin, Wolf stood beside the horses. Samuel went inside to argue with Mrs. Finch about salt. Mara stayed on the porch. Wolf handed her a folded order. New assignment? 2. Where? First near Bisbee. Fraudulent explosives invoices. And second, Las Cruces, missing survey clerk. Mara opened the paper. Dangerous? Probably. Good coffee? No, she sighed. We leave tomorrow if you want. There it was again, if you want. The words had never become casual. Mara looked through the open cabin door at Samuel sitting at the table, while Mrs. Finch moved a bowl out of his reach because he kept adding salt. Home did not ask her to become smaller. The trail did not ask her to stop belonging. She folded the order. Tomorrow. Wolf nodded. At dawn, Samuel stood on the porch in his old wool coat. Mara saddled her horse. This departure was quieter than the first. No speeches. No fear disguised as advice. Samuel handed her a small object wrapped in cloth. She opened it, his first assay hammer. I thought that belonged here. It did. Why give it to me? Because I bought another. Mara stared. Samuel grinned. Don't make everything sacred. She laughed and put the hammer in her saddlebag. Wolf mounted. Mara leaned down and kissed Samuel's forehead. Right? You right. I do. Reports don't count. I know. They rode east. At the ridge, Mara looked back. Samuel raised one hand. She raised hers. Then Black Rock disappeared behind stone. The trail ahead was pale with frost. Wolf rode at her left. For a mile they said nothing. Then he asked, Do you regret taking the job? Mara considered the question. She thought of the auction platform, the first map, the firing pin, the cold tunnel, her father's neck beneath the rope, Rose's biscuits, Arthur Bell opening the back door, Ezra's repair ledger, the ugly Gazette headline, the little silver badge inside her coat. No. Wolf nodded. She glanced at him. Do you regret paying the restitution? Yes. Mara stared. He kept a straight face. The recovery petition was denied. She laughed so loudly that a rabbit burst from the brush. Wolf's mouth finally broke into a smile. Entirely wasted money, he said. Terrible investment. Financial disaster. They rode on. Behind them, the restored boundary flag snapped once in the wind and settled. Ahead, the country opened wide. The Bisbee assignment taught Mara what changed when no one knew her story. There was no auction platform there. No crowd that had watched her become a line in a debt book. No widow whose face she recognized from nightmares. The mining superintendent greeted her as Miss Bennett because that was the name on the federal order. He disliked the order, disliked Wolf, and disliked the fact that Mara carried a notebook, but his contempt was ordinary. It was not built from an old verdict. Mara found that oddly restful. The case involved blasting powder. A company ledger showed 30 crates delivered to a copper mine. The powder house contained 22. The superintendent claimed the missing 8 had been used during emergency shaft work after a cave-in. Wolf examined the invoices. Mara examined the workers' lunchroom. What are you doing? He asked when he found her lifting tin cups from a shelf, looking for men who worked an emergency shift. With cups, emergency shifts mean bad coffee. Wolf waited. She pointed to a row of enamel cups. See the soot? He did not. She brought one closer. Fresh black ring underneath. Someone heated coffee directly over a lamp because the stove was cold. There are 6. Exactly. The superintendent had claimed 24 men worked through the night. Mara questioned the cook. He remembered 6. She questioned the powder clerk. He remembered no emergency issue because the lock on the powder house had frozen and nobody woke him for the spare key. The 8 missing crates had not gone into a collapsed shaft. They had gone across the border under false manifests. 3 days later, Wolf arrested a freight agent without firing a shot. That evening, they sat outside a boarding house eating beef stew that tasted mostly of pepper. Wolf said, "You solved explosives fraud with dirty cups." The cups were not dirty. They were covered in soot. That was evidence. They were still dirty. Mara tore a piece of bread. "You solved murders with broken branches. Branches are outdoors. Convenient standard." The boarding house owner came out carrying a wash basin. She looked from Wolf to Mara. "Your husband wants more coffee?" Mara choked on the bread. Wolf's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. "No." Mara said too quickly. The woman looked embarrassed. "Sorry? No, boss?" Mara looked at Wolf. He looked at his stew. "Unfortunately," she said. The woman nodded as if the arrangement finally made sense and went inside. Wolf waited until the door closed. "Unfortunately, you were being unhelpful. I said nothing." "Exactly." He drank his coffee. After a moment, he said, "For the record, I would also reject husband." Mara raised an eyebrow. "For the record, accuracy." She laughed. Their silences were changing. At first, silence around Wolf had felt like a locked door. Then it had become a language of signals on trails and in dangerous rooms. Now sometimes, it was simply quiet between two people who had already said what mattered. That did not make it easy. It made it honest. In March, Mara received a letter from Rose Halloway. Rose wrote that Nathan's departmental pension had finally been approved. She wrote that her oldest boy had begun asking whether his father had been brave. "I told him yes," she wrote, "but I also told him his father was frightened near the end. I thought that was important. Brave men ought to be allowed fear, or else boys grow up thinking fear makes them cowards." Mara folded the letter and kept it inside her notebook. A week later, Arthur Bell sent a copy of BlackRock's new records procedure. 2 clerks were now required to witness mining transfers over a certain value. Federal duplicates went out weekly by mail rather than remaining in county storage. At the bottom, Arthur wrote, "It is harder to hide paper when paper travels." Mara showed Wolf. He read it and nodded. "Good, that's all. Very good. You express enthusiasm like a gravestone." He gave the page back. "You are aware that Arthur once hid evidence under a floorboard, and now he mails duplicates, growth, gravestone." By spring, the case that had begun at Devil's Throat no longer belonged only to BlackRock. Federal prosecutors used the Hounds Ledger to reopen 6 land transfers in 3 counties. Families who had been told their fathers, husbands, or brothers died by accident received letters asking them to describe old suspicions. Most had little evidence left. Some had kept things anyway: a bent survey nail, a strange cartridge, a threat written on butcher paper, a receipt that did not match a wagon load. Mara learned that poor people saved proof differently from officials. They kept it in sewing boxes, under flower bins, inside Bibles, behind framed photographs. They saved what felt wrong even when they did not know what it meant. She and Wolf spent weeks collecting those objects. At a ranch outside Benson, an elderly woman gave Mara a leather glove that had belonged to her son. A smear of blue ore still marked one finger. At a mining camp near Tombstone, a boy brought out a brass tag he had found after his father vanished. The number matched a Vail smelter bin. Each object was small. Together they built a structure no single lie could knock down. Mara began to understand why Wolf trusted things before testimony. People forgot. People feared. People wanted approval from those who frightened them. Objects wanted nothing. They simply remained. One afternoon, while cataloging evidence at a federal office, Mara found the original auction bond among the closed BlackRock papers. She had not seen it since Wolf dissolved it. Her name was still there. Mara Bennett, female, age 26, physically able. Value of labor to satisfy civil obligation. Wolf was across the room speaking with a deputy. Mara read the bond again. A year earlier, the words had felt like iron. Now they looked flimsy, cheap ink, poor paper, a clerk's cramped handwriting. She had expected freedom to make the document disappear. Instead, freedom had changed its size. She folded it and returned it to the file. Wolf came over. "You all right?" "Yes." He glanced at the folder. "Do you want that destroyed?" Mara considered it. "Why?" "Because someday someone will say the town never did it." Wolf looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed the file. "We keep it. At Yuma Territorial Prison, Alistair Vail learned the cost of heat." The quarry began work before sunrise, but by 8 the stone reflected enough light to make men squint. Vail's hands blistered within the first week. He had once believed manual labor was a category of person. Miners labored, stablemen labored, women sentenced to restitution labored. Men like Vail arranged labor, valued it, assigned it, and profited from it. A sledgehammer corrected the distinction. It weighed 12 pounds. The handle tore skin below his thumb. The first month, he tried to persuade guards that he was medically unfit. The prison doctor disagreed. The second month, he offered legal advice to other prisoners in exchange for portions of their water ration. No one trusted him enough. The third month, he stopped introducing himself as Judge Vail. Amos Pike worked the same quarry line 50 yards away. They did not speak. Pike blamed Vail. Vail blamed Pike. Both blamed Kane. Neither spent much time blaming the men whose land they had taken. One morning, Vail refused to lift his hammer. A guard walked down from the shade. "I require the warden," Vail said. The guard looked at him. "There has been a procedural error in my labor classification." The guard waited. "I served on the bench for 14 years. The guard picked up a heavier sledgehammer from the tool cart. Vail stared at it. "What is that?" "Your new procedural classification." A prisoner nearby laughed. The guard set the hammer at Vail's feet. "Break stone." Vail looked around. No clerk took notes. No lawyer objected. No commissioner whispered strategy. The white quarry wall waited. He bent and lifted the hammer. For the first time in years, the weight in his hands belonged to him. Back in BlackRock, summer arrived hard and bright. Samuel Bennett's eyesight declined further. He could still distinguish daylight from shadow and large shapes at close range, but reading was gone. Mara arranged for an eye doctor from Phoenix to visit. The doctor examined Samuel at the cabin table, using polished lenses and a lamp that smelled of hot brass. Afterward, he told Mara quietly that surgery might help one eye but carried risk. Samuel heard anyway. "I'm old, not dead," he said. The doctor looked embarrassed. Mara folded her arms. "You're also impossible." Samuel smiled. He chose the surgery. For 2 weeks afterward, he wore a bandage and complained about being treated like glass. Mrs. Finch ignored him. Rose came twice with soup. Wolf sent a telegram that read, "Tell him follow doctor orders. This is federal advice." Samuel had Mara read it 3 times. Federal advice? That's what it says. "Tell him federal jurisdiction ends at my porch." Mara wired back, "Patient rejects jurisdiction. Request reinforcements," Wolf replied. Good luck. When the bandage came off, Samuel could make out Mara's face from across the table with one eye. Not clearly. Enough. He stared longer than she expected. "What? You changed your hair. I cut it months ago." "I know. You couldn't see it." "I can now." He blinked, and his eye watered from the light. Mara looked away under the excuse of pouring coffee. Samuel smiled. "You look like your mother around the mouth." "Everyone says that. No one else has authority." "Is this another jurisdiction argument?" "Yes." He drank his coffee and grimaced. "Too weak." Mara took the cup. "Your vision improved and immediately became a public nuisance." The mine itself settled into a slower rhythm. The north vein produced enough to repair the road, pay workers fairly, and fund the family's account. Samuel insisted on transparent weights. Every ore wagon was measured on a public scale. 2 people signed each tally. Once a month, the records were copied and sent to the federal office. Mara had designed the procedure. She did not trust virtue to keep men honest. She trusted duplication, witnesses, and the inconvenience of coordinated fraud. The red boundary flag finally tore in a monsoon storm. Samuel replaced it with a plain cedar marker burned with the correct survey number. "No cloth?" Mara asked. "Cloth is dramatic. You liked it last year." I was newly vindicated. "And now, I'm tired." They stood together above Devil's Throat. The sniper shelf was visible across the ravine. Mara no longer needed to look at it, but she did. Samuel followed her gaze as best he could. "That where he was?" "Yes. 400 yards?" "More." Samuel whistled. "I couldn't have hit him when I was 20. "I know. Glad somebody finally noticed." Mara smiled. The comment was light. The years behind it were not. They walked down before the afternoon heat. 1 year after the auction, Mara and Wolf rented a permanent federal office in a converted assay building near the telegraph line. The front room held 2 desks. Wolf objected to the second desk because he said it blocked the evidence cabinet. Mara moved the evidence cabinet. The office had a narrow stove, 4 shelves, 2 straight-back chairs for witnesses, and a window that rattled whenever freight wagons passed. Mara liked it immediately. She put labels on everything. Wolf removed half the labels. She put them back. A week later, he stopped removing them. Her desk held a glass inkwell, blotting sand, pencils sharpened to different points, sealing wax, a brass magnifier, and a tin cup filled with survey pins. In the top drawer, she kept the blue ore sample. In the second, the old firing pin sketch. The original Sharps casing sat on the desk, not as a trophy, as a reference standard. New cases sometimes involved long-range rifles. The casing reminded them how much information a small mark could carry. One afternoon, a young deputy from Phoenix visited and picked it up without asking. Mara held out her hand. He laughed. "It's just spent brass. Then you won't mind putting it down." He did. Wolf looked up from his desk only after the deputy left. "You frightened him." He touched catalogued evidence. "It is a closed case. Evidence does not become a paperweight because a jury went home." Wolf nodded. "Correct." Mara stared at him. "Are you encouraging me? Rare event? Record it." She made a mark in her notebook. He narrowed his eyes. "You did not? Permanent record. Their work drew all kinds of people. Miners came in with boundary disputes. Widows brought letters. Rail agents reported thefts. Once, a saloon owner arrived claiming someone was stealing whiskey from a locked cellar. Wolf told Mara it was not a federal matter. Mara asked 3 questions and discovered the missing whiskey had been shipped across territorial lines under false tax stamps. Wolf took the case. The saloon owner later sent them 2 bottles. Wolf returned them. Mara regretted his ethics briefly. They became known along the mining routes, not as legends, not to themselves. Legends were stories cleaned of cold breakfasts, paperwork, infected cuts, missed trains, wrong turns, and witnesses who changed their minds. Their actual life contained all of those things. It also contained useful work. Mara became good at interviewing people who distrusted uniforms. Wolf became better at waiting while she did it. He still frightened some witnesses simply by standing in a doorway. Mara learned to point him toward the stove and make him pour coffee. Why do I always make the coffee? Because you look less alarming with a pot in your hand. That seems unlikely. Try smiling. No, then coffee. Sometimes they argued. Mara wanted to pursue every discrepancy. Wolf insisted on evidence thresholds. Wolf preferred moving quickly once probable cause existed. Mara wanted another document, another witness, another measurement. Their disagreements did not weaken the work. They made it slower in the right places. One rainy evening, they stayed late over a case involving a forged land patent. Water tapped the windows. The stove popped. Mara compared signatures under the magnifier. Wolf sharpened a pencil with his knife. "You know," she said, "I thought you never talked because you were mysterious." "I am deeply mysterious." "No, you just dislike unnecessary sentences." "That is one of my mysteries." Mara smiled at the paper. After a while, Wolf said, "I thought you would leave after your father was cleared. Why?" "Most people do not remain near the machinery that hurt them." Mara looked up. "Is that why you became a marshal?" He stopped sharpening. The question sat between them. Wolf rarely spoke about himself. Mara had learned not to push every locked door. He set the pencil down. "My mother needed county protection once." Mara waited. "It did not come. That's all?" "For tonight," she nodded. Rain continued. Wolf looked at the forged patent. "You stayed. I did. Why?" Mara turned the brass casing once with one finger. "Because the law was not the thing that put me on that platform." Wolf raised an eyebrow. "Men using it badly did." She thought of Arthur mailing duplicates, Ezra keeping repair records, Rose saving a firing pin, Magistrate Voss writing half a day to stop a hanging, and other people used it to get me off. Wolf leaned back. Mara continued. "I used to think justice was a person. A good judge, maybe. A good sheriff. Someone you could trust to decide correctly. And now? Now I think it's a habit." Wolf looked toward the rain-dark window. "Habits fail." "Yes, so you build systems for when they do." He was quiet. Then he nodded once. Mara smiled. "Was that approval?" "No, permanent record says otherwise." The next morning, Rose Holloway arrived with her 2 children. She had business in town and stopped at the office with a basket. "Biscuits?" Mara asked. Rose frowned. "Bread safer." Rose's youngest boy stared at Wolf. "Are you the marshal who shot all the bad men?" Wolf looked uncomfortable. Mara hid a smile. "No," he said. The boy looked disappointed. Mara crouched. "He's the marshal who fills out forms after other people make bad decisions." Wolf looked at her. Rose laughed for the first time Mara had heard without grief behind it. Her older son wandered to Mara's desk and pointed at the casing. "Is that the bullet that killed Pa?" The room changed. Rose stiffened. Mara did not move the casing away. "No," she said. "It is the same kind." The boy studied it. "Did it hurt him?" Rose's face tightened. Mara answered carefully. "Yes." The boy nodded, absorbing this. "Did he know you caught the man?" "No." "Then how does he know?" Mara looked at Rose. Rose knelt beside her son. "We remember for him." The boy seemed satisfied enough. Children had a way of accepting an answer adults would spend years trying to improve. Before leaving, Rose put the basket on Mara's desk. Under the bread lay Nathan's old deputy notebook. "I found this behind a loose drawer." Mara opened it. Most pages held routine notes, fence complaints, a stolen saddle, drunk and disorderly reports. Near the back, Nathan had written wagon weights from Vale's smelter, ordinary numbers, the beginning of everything. Rose touched the cover. "I don't want it in my house anymore." "Are you sure?" "Yes." Mara logged it into evidence, even though the case was closed. Some records existed for prosecution. Others existed because forgetting was too easy. That autumn, Samuel came to the federal office for the first time. He wore a new coat and hated it. Mrs. Finch had apparently forced him to buy one that did not smell of blasting powder. His improved eye allowed him to see the outline of the office, but not small print. Mara guided him around. "This is my desk. Too many papers. This is Wolf's. Fewer papers. He hides them in drawers." Wolf looked offended. Samuel walked to the evidence shelves. "Labels. Mine. Good." He found the chair near the stove and sat. For an hour he listened while Mara and Wolf interviewed a surveyor. Afterward, as they ate lunch from paper parcels, Samuel said, "You're bossy." Mara stared. "You came all this way to tell me that?" "I needed evidence." Wolf looked at his sandwich. Samuel pointed toward him. "He knows." Wolf said, "I have no comment." "Coward," Mara said. Samuel laughed. The sound filled the office. Later, when Wolf went to the telegraph station, Samuel stood beside Mara's desk. His fingers found the brass casing. What's this? The Sharps reference. He turned it slowly. This is what proved the caliber? One of the things. Samuel set it beside the inkwell. I used to think a big truth needed a big thing. Mara capped her pen. What do you mean? Silver vein. Mine shaft. Body in a canyon. Big things. He tapped the casing. But sometimes it's a dent in brass. Sometimes. He touched the inkwell, and sometimes somebody writes it down. Mara looked at the two objects. Metal and ink. Damage and record. Samuel squeezed her shoulder. I'm glad he bought the debt. Mara turned sharply. Samuel smiled. Not because he bought you. Careful. Because he paid enough to make Vale angry. She laughed. That may be the worst explanation you've ever given. I have worse. I know. Samuel stayed the night at a boarding house and left before noon the next day. Mara watched his wagon until it disappeared. Wolf came out of the telegraph office. He looks stronger. He is. You worry. So does he. I know. Wolf handed her a telegram. What now? Missing payroll shipment north of Globe. Mara read it. Bandits? Fraud? Likely. Bad coffee? Certain. She folded the telegram. When? Morning. Mara looked through the office window. Her desk was visible inside. The inkwell caught the light. Beside it sat the tarnished Sharps casing. For a moment, she saw the auction platform again. Not as a wound opening, but as a point on a map. A place she had passed through. She remembered the way the crowd looked at her hands, deciding what those hands could be used for. Laundry, kitchen work, scrubbing floors. They had not imagined those same hands turning maps, sealing evidence, testing stone, holding a frightened witness steady while he signed his name. They had mistaken usefulness for ownership. Mara understood the difference now. Useful work could be chosen. Ownership could not. She closed the office door. Wolf stood beside the horses, checking a cinch. Mara locked the door and joined him. The evening air smelled of cedar smoke, dry earth, and bread from the bakery down the street. Ordinary smells, she preferred them. There would be no final day when every corrupt man was gone, no last case, no perfect court. Samuel's silver would eventually thin. Rose's children would grow up. Arthur might make another mistake. Mara would make many. Wolf would keep using too few words. The work was not a road to an ending. It was maintenance, like bracing a mine shaft, like copying a record before fire could take it, like checking the weight on a scale even when the man standing beside it seemed honest. Mara mounted. Wolf handed her the payroll telegram. You have the file? She tapped her satchel. Do you have coffee? He lifted a tin. She nodded. Then we can survive federal service. They rode out as the last light left the roofs. Behind them, the office window turned gold under the kerosene lamp they had forgotten to extinguish. Mara noticed after half a block. She reined in. Wolf looked back. What? The lamp. He waited. Mara sighed, turned her horse, and rode back to put it out. Wolf followed. There were truths worth defending, she had learned. There were also buildings worth not burning down. When they finally left again, the street was dark. The trail beyond town opened under a clean sky. Mara rode beside the marshal who had once held a paper saying he owned her labor and had never once asked her to behave as if he owned anything at all. The distinction had changed both their lives. The following spring, a summons from Phoenix arrived with the territorial seal pressed crookedly into red wax. Mara assumed at first that it concerned a pending land fraud case. Instead, the letter requested her testimony before a legislative committee reviewing the restitution by services statute. She read the first paragraph twice. Wolf stood at the evidence cabinet. You expected that? No. Will you go? Mara folded the letter. Yes. The hearing room in Phoenix had none of Black Rock's dust. The windows were tall. The floor had been polished recently enough that chairs squeaked when people shifted. Legislators sat behind a long table with water glasses, stacks of paper, and the grave expressions of men who preferred problems to arrive already reduced to paragraphs. Mara wore her federal pin. She did not bring the Sharps casing. This was not a ballistics hearing. A senator from Tucson asked her to describe the day of the auction. Mara did. She kept it plain. Her father had been sentenced. The court declared an unpaid civil obligation. The statute allowed a relative's labor to be bonded. Offers were made in public. Marshal Wolf paid the obligation. The senator interrupted. And you were not physically harmed? Mara looked at him. No. Were you starved? No. Beaten? No. The man leaned back slightly, as if those answers helped. Mara continued. I was listed as property value against a debt I did not create. The senator tapped his pencil, but the arrangement was temporary. So is a noose if someone removes it in time. The room went quiet. Another legislator, an older woman from Pima County, asked, "What made the statute dangerous in your case?" The same people controlled the conviction, the debt, the land transfer, and the definition of service, meaning, the law gave men who wanted our claim a legal path to remove my father and restrict me at the same time. Would the statute have been acceptable under an honest judge? Mara thought before answering. No. Why not? Because honesty in one official is not a safeguard. The woman nodded slowly. Mara placed a copy of the bond on the table. This paper called me physically able before anyone asked what work I agreed to do. It assigned my labor before anyone asked whether I had committed anything. A good judge might use a bad law gently. The next judge might not. A ranch representative testified after her. He argued that bonded service provided practical restitution in poor districts where money was scarcest. Mara listened. When invited to respond, she did not call him cruel. She asked how often the statute had been used against adult sons of wealthy defendants. The committee clerk searched the records. Almost never. How often against daughters, wives, immigrant relatives, or families without land attorneys? Often enough that the room changed. The hearing lasted 2 days. Wolf sat in the back for most of it, hat on his knee, saying nothing. When they left the building, Mara found him under an awning while rain darkened the street. "Well?" he asked. "I dislike committees. That is healthy." They asked whether I was beaten, as if ownership only counts when somebody leaves bruises. Wolf looked at the wet road. People prefer injuries they can photograph. Mara pulled on her gloves. "Do you think they'll repeal it?" "Maybe." "That is not an answer. It is the accurate answer." She sighed. 3 months later, the territory suspended the statute pending revision. The new rule prohibited debt service from being imposed on relatives who were not parties to the underlying offense or civil judgment. It did not repair what had happened. It did not return Nathan Holloway. It did not erase the platform from Mara's memory. It did something smaller and more useful. It made the same shortcut harder to use on the next family. Samuel received the news by post. His reply contained one line. "Good, now make them fix the coffee louse." Mara pinned the note above her desk. Wolf left it there. Years later, newspapers would simplify the story. They would call her the woman sold for her father's crime. They would call Wolf the Apache Marshal, who bought her freedom. Some would make the tale about silver. Others would make it about a hanging stopped at the final moment. They would be wrong in the usual ways stories were wrong. The real change had happened in smaller places. A daughter wiping shaving soap from her father's cheek. A stranger placing tools instead of chores in her hands. A widow remembering the last word she had been told to dismiss. A clerk unlocking a back door. A blacksmith keeping a repair ledger. A frightened town finally looking at the men it had been trained not to question. A bond crossed out in ink. A job offered with the words "if you want." The silver mattered. The bullet mattered. The law mattered. Choice mattered more. And on mornings when Mara opened the federal office before Wolf arrived, she would set fresh paper beside the inkwell, check the evidence seals, and place the old Sharps casing back where it belonged. Not as a monument to violence, as a reminder to look closely. Every lie left a mark. Every mark could be read. And no human life belonged on the wrong side of a ledger simply because powerful men had written it there.